Hi everybody, I am Beth African Storyteller and welcome to my YouTube channel. I hope you're here from watching Africa's Problem is Packaging because this is almost like a follow-up. Like I said in that video, this is a work of passion. It's very personal to me. It is part of the makeup of my pride, my drive, but also my biggest fear that I'm not able to pass this to my children in a way that is impactful and helpful to, Africa as a continent and Kenya as a country and, my tribe, their tribe, our clans, and kind of just, it's a fear. Now, I would like to say, just as an entry point, that for too long we've been taught to believe that our languages are less. Our history started with colonization and that our cultures are backwards. We need to unlearn these lies. We need to embrace our truth. We need to decolonize the mind, which means we have to reject these ideas. We have to relearn who we are. It means rediscovering our strengths, our beauties, those in our traditions, in our ways, in our languages, our foods, and our stories. Teaching our children our languages and our true history is one of the greatest acts of love, I think, and that when they know where they come from, then they understand their worth and their place in the world. Let's show them the richness of our culture, yeah? Not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to celebrate in their everyday. Decolonizing the mind is a concept that was planted in my mind during my literature study in university because of Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonization of the Mind. Ngugi is one of Kenya's and Africa's most celebrated authors. And this book is so insightful, so deep, and it teaches so much more than what it says in the book. And I use that concept all the time to gauge, think about myself, and knowing my inabilities and knowing my disabilities when it comes to conceptualizing my truth, who I am, my culture, my background, what makes my genome tick is something that is constantly in my mind. I personally, and I'm going to use the word unlearning and relearning a lot, but I personally think it's impossible to unlearn anything you've learned. Any toxic, any good, anything you learn, I don't think it's possible to unlearn unless you lost your whole memory. I think it's when you understand why it's toxic or beautiful. I think that it's like painting a new coat of paint over something, a structure that has been here for years. It doesn't take away from the color, the original color, the authenticity of that structure, but you have this provision that you put on top, based off of your preference, your assessment, your understanding, your liking. You're covering it with something that you want to represent yourself as. And I think that when I hear people saying unlearning toxic traits, unlearning this, undoing, I'm like, I personally don't think it's possible. And that is just a personal opinion. And I know a lot of people might not agree with me, but I think that the idea of decolonizing the mind and using and focusing on reclaiming and celebrating our Africanness through unlearning and relearning and embracing African culture, I want to go very easy on the unlearning part. I have seen people who believe logically one thing, but their actions say something else. And I think that I'm same in many ways, that who we are and our fears are very true to us. And sometimes it resurfaces as an insecurity. And I recently had a conversation with a friend, a trusted friend, and she asked me, why do you always take this personally? And I was explaining to her how long it took me to hide my insecurities and my smallness as a woman, as an African, as a village girl, as somebody who has been disqualified from so many arenas so many times because of my passport, my color, my background, and my being a woman, and how when somebody just pokes a hole in that whole little, blanket of insecurity, how just it tumbles, it falls apart. And that is part of that, that coat of color that I said you can cover your identity in and present yourself as this new shiny thing, but underneath the makeup, because I don't want to go too much into this, because I want us to focus on how for centuries we've been taught to see the world through lenses that are not our own, to see ourselves through perspectives that don't align with our truth. And I'm interested in us exploring the decolonization of the mind. And I imagine that decolonization of the mind is such an abstract concept. So let's get into what it means. Now, colonization is the imposition of foreign cultures, languages, and ways of thinking, leading to the erosion of our original identities. And it's tricky that I'm talking about this in English, which is the colonizer's language. And I'm using concepts that were imposed on me to defend something that I was never personally in touch with. So you see, there's already that removal of myself from myself. Like, it's already complicated, right? And so thinking of decolonizing the mind using the colonizer's language is a paradox. It is an irony. It is interesting. It is a contrast that is very, it creates a tumultuous resonance in my mind when I try to think that I'm thinking of decolonizing myself, but I'm using colonizer's language. And I speak many native languages, and my own vernacular, my own mother tongue cannot express these notions because these notions were not akin to my nativity, if that makes sense. Like, my people didn't think of this concept, so it's impossible to think and discuss these concepts using my native tongue. Decolonization of the mind means questioning, shedding those influences to reconnect with authentic African traditions and perspectives. There are common areas of decolonization, and these are language, history, culture, and self-perception. And I want us to first talk about the unlearning the narratives. It's important for us to question the narratives and the stereotypes that have been imposed on African people. If you look at history books and you look at the elevation of European ideals of beauty and the marginalization of indigenous knowledge systems, you realize that not only were we told we were trash, our trash was taken away from us. Here's a story. I'm a storyteller, so I'm gonna, one of my favorite gurus is Sadhguru. If you know me, you know that. And he tells this story of how one time in his hometown, they took this homeless man that used to walk around with a bag of trash just filled with shit, like just random things that didn't really were useful. And they took this, they grabbed him by force, and he had this overgrown dirty hair, and he had dirty clothes, and he was very unhygienic. So they caught him, they shaved his head clean, they scrubbed him down clean, they cut his nails, they gave him new clothes, they gave him, deodorant, they gave him a new bag, they burned his old stuff, and they gave him a new bag filled with new clothes and useful things, and they gave him food, nice, clean food. And after this whole situation, this man went and sat under a tree, and he was crying. And he just kept saying, "Can I have my things back, please? Why did you take my things?" He uses this story for a different reason. He uses it to justify that we all just collect stuff. Some of that stuff we have rationalized ourselves into thinking those are important things. Like, we are all hoarders. We have, extra furniture, extra clothing, extra cars, extra houses, extra rooms, all kinds of nonsensical things that we have justified. We've gotten even as far as killing each other for things like stones, because they are precious stones, but they are stones nonetheless. We have just decided to value them a certain way because of either their rarity, which, if you think about diamonds, which are not really rare and every woman can easily afford a piece, but that has been a controlled substance so that their value can always stay up. But he uses that story to say we all just have a ton of shit that we have justified into thinking is more important than other people's shit. But I'm using this story to say that if you think of our own narratives, if you think of our own systems, it was taken away from us and it was burnt because we were told it's rubbish, it's nonsense, it's just redundant shit, that we don't need our gods because we have been given this sparkling new one. We don't need our items of dress because we've been given these softer fabrics. We don't need our jewelry because we've been given these other shiny sparkling ones. We don't need our cultures because they are barbaric and they are horrible, and we've been given new ones. We don't need our names, and so we have been given new ones. Our stuff was burnt and taken away from us. And I want you to think about how we have been taught new standards. Like, I'm a well-endowed woman, like I'm well endowed. But I'm constantly thinking to myself, when I see fashion and I go to stores and I buy clothes and they don't fit right, and it's taken me a long time to understand, like, sometimes the tailoring is for the body shape of the women. Like, I remember when I lived in India, I could barely ever find shoes that I wanted because number 7, which is UK 7, American 9, was considered to be a man size. Like, they have Asian women generally have smaller feet, and so the fashion is tailored for the women who live there, right? But I'm an outsider. And I remember a friend of mine saying they lived in Japan and they had such a deep sense of body dysmorphia, and they developed eating disorders because they were always the biggest woman, even though by all standards they're very skinny. They're size 0, and they felt fat because a Japanese fashion is tailored for petite, small boned Japanese women. And so it doesn't sit the same way. Even jeans, like, I need like a big booty jean. Like, when I go to buy my jeans, it doesn't always sometimes sit right, but I understand that the demographic that this jeans was tailored for may not have included me as a sample of it. Like, I wasn't part of the the intended market. And so I want you to imagine that all of our stuff was stripped away and we were given this new stuff. And most of us, like myself, I'm lucky to have been raised in a very Kenyan, very village upbringing, but even that was already, like, I was born years after independence, and my grandma, who's turning 97 this year, tells me the stories of how they cooked and how they ate, and I love hearing that because that is a connection to my history. So this process of unlearning, painting a new coat of color, is a continuous process that we have to recognize that we have internalized biases, and we should work to actively change and challenge those biases. Thinking of myself as not traditionally beautiful was, I don't know, that has never happened. I'm not the most stunning woman in the room, never have been. I remember that I was raised in a place where beauty standards were nothing. Like, you needed to be a good quality human, full stop. I don't remember thinking, oh my God, this is, except for my sister Joy. She has this tiny little nose, and she has, she's a button nose, and she has high, really sharp cheekbones. And I always used to think, in a very alien-y kind of way, I used to think she's stunning. And that was my standard, of beauty. But nobody talked about physical attributes and whatever. You needed, like, curves were it. That's it. You needed some junk in your trunk. And you needed to have a washed waist. And I remember, like, now I tell people that my gap, I told my dentist, my gap is a sign of beauty where I come from, because he was trying to close it with I was trying to time, like, I was like, no sir, this right here, this is my money maker. You cannot take it away from me, because standards of beauty are different. And I'm lucky I was raised in an environment where beauty wasn't a thing. I went to high school, we'd all put on a little powder, a little eyeliner, and we'd feel cute. I went to college, and maybe things were a little different, but I already had a very strong sense of self and a very strong I had a lot of confidence in who I was, so it wasn't threatened. But now I'm looking at my nieces, and I'm looking at the younger generation, and I'm seeing them struggle. I'm like, girl, you ain't never going to be a size 0 or 2 in a healthy way, because you are born to be curvy. You are born to have all of this going on. And so if you think of how to relearn and challenge concepts and standards and things that have been taught to us, it becomes a problem. I look at the Kenyan middle class, and a lot of the middle class in Africa is a huge problem. And I'm looking at parents struggling to teach their children English as first language, because then that presents them in a different light, in a way that makes them feel like they're more privileged, they're more attuned to, civilization and developed spaces. And it breaks my heart when these children cannot speak their mother tongue, because what are we even doing? We cannot learn our cultures, we don't speak our languages, because foreign concepts cannot naturally integrate with foreign, like, imposed languages. Language is the purest vehicle of passing culture along. And so we are failing. Like, I am part of the problem. My children speak Swahili. I struggled, and thank you to my nieces that really, when we were in Kenya for a year, during the lockdown, they made sure my twins were speaking Swahili. I was so shocked to see them speak Swahili, but they don't yet speak my mother tongue, their dad's mother tongue, which is considered to be their primary vernacular. They don't know a lot about our clan systems. I feel ashamed, and now I have a son, which is even more complicated, because traditionally women marry into other communities, right? Men marry into, they like marry women into their community. So my son is supposed to be a very strong carrier, and I see my husband is very luo. He listens to the music, he eats the food, he's constantly talking to his friends and family in the language, and I feel so proud to see that, because my son is exposed to it. And recently he started, going back and forth with him with simple words and saying, "Hey, Omera," and they laugh, and my son tries to say things back to him. And I'm failing in that regard as well, but I'm conscious and I'm working on it. And even food, me teaching my children why our food is important and including it in our everyday diet, and teaching them about our value system and how respect works, and how, the hierarchy of wisdom and naturally is, and how to still look out for themselves and expect that, respect is reciprocal, but also teaching them what our ways are. And I feel like as middle class families, we fail at this at times, because we are so consumed with packaging our children in a way that is consumable in the West. And if we just kind of weeded our own backyards, and we kind of just, kind of took out all the weeds in our own gardens, it would be a beautiful place for our children to work in and to sustain and to develop. And I'm in a foreign country as I speak, which is in itself ironic, right? But I feel like it is part of the work, that sometimes you have to go and sit in certain spaces to understand what's so beautiful about your own space. And I think my international travel has done more opening my mind up to the beauty of Africa and our culture and our language and our systems. And now I'm also in a position to sell it and to convince other people of that beauty. And so just being able to look at all this. So all of these things are being able to unlearn the narratives and actively not teaching it to the next generation. Like, I could never, like I said, I don't think I can unlearn all the toxicity that came with my patriarchal or whatever bullshit in my own natural environment, but I'm trying to teach my children different. I'm trying to teach them different standards. I'm trying to inculcate in them things that I think are going to serve them very well as African citizens. And then we need to look at how to relearn our roots. How can we relearn our roots? How can we refocus and go back to that? And I think some of the practical ways we can do that is, one, consuming African products. We have to support African artists. We have to buy local foods. We have to wear African-made clothing. We have to highlight the economic and cultural impact of choosing African products. Being able to buy things made in Africa, like in my New York Kenyan community, we talk a lot about Dormans. I didn't know this when I lived in Kenya, that Dormans coffee is top notch, because a lot of like coffee purists don't like processed coffee, instant coffee. They like to brew their own coffee. But real like consumers of Kenyan coffee, it's Dormans. And when I go to Starbucks and I ask what brew am I taking, and they say Kenyan, I always say that. I say, I am Kenyan. My grandfather was a coffee farmer. My father was a tea farmer. And sometimes when my mom sent tea leaves from home, I pass it to my friends. I say, oh, no, you never had tea like this, because this is tea from my mother's farm. This is tea I can trace back to where it came from. And so just taking pride in that and buying our own products. Most of my jewelry is African, because, and I, like I said in my previous video, I feel guilty ordering off of Amazon. Even when it says it's Kenyan made, I'm like, I don't know who's really getting the profit. You know, I'm gonna go back to Kenya and I'm gonna buy Kenyan product. Even art, like I bought when I lived in Dar es Salaam, I have boxes and boxes in my house waiting to build my mansion, which is a whole other story. But I have boxes and boxes of Tanzanian art that I really enjoy, the paintings, the masks, just beautiful things. Other places as well. So let us consume our own African product, learning and teaching our history, encouraging viewers to seek out, no, even readers, and even like encouraging the people in our own context to seek out African history and African authors who represent African history in and from an African perspective. You know, I know a lot of the world looks at, you know, Wole Soyinka or Chinua Achebe, but I'm like, hey, we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, we have a couple of people from Kenya. Like, I be trying to put Kenyan literature out there as well. I teach a lot of North African, South African, Ethiopian. Like, I try to do a lot of different kinds of African literature, and I read it myself. So learning our own history through the perspective of our own people, researching our kingdoms prior to colonization, researching the profound additions to the knowledge systems around the world that we have done. You know, look at the Benin bronzes somewhere in Europe. I mean, that was amazing. Knowing what that is, teaching your children what that is going to make your children to be proud to be African, and therefore see the importance of conserving their own culture. And by the way, and I like the way Asians, a lot of Asian countries do that. They will westernize a lot of themselves, but they will hold so strongly to their roots that there's always anchor for the children. Even though they wear blue jeans and t-shirt and, you know, crop tops, they also will wear saris. And I look at the way China does and the way Japan does it, where they are technologically so advanced. But if you look at their food, if you look at their language, I do not know many Asian people. And I also give this props to my Arab speaking friends that I have, you know, experience of. They will teach their children their mother tongue. I don't know, like my American Vietnamese best friend speaks Vietnamese, and she was born, raised in America. And so just these little vehicles of our history, these little, you know, and also just teaching our children about African heroes, indigenous stories, about languages, and making it a family effort. You know, like my husband is very big on certain things. He, like I said, he consumes a lot of his own native music, Hangla and all the bangers from the Luo community. He's a huge fan of bongo music. He's a huge fan of reggae, Lucky Dube, you know, Bob. He's a huge fan of West African music. And I love that he plays it out loud and the kids can hear it and enjoy it. We talk about these stories, and even when at dinner tables, like my daughters have this habit of saying, Baba, tell us a story. He always will be telling some fable from our culture. Also embracing our languages. Like I said, it's reclaiming African language is a powerful step in reconnecting with the culture. You cannot transmit the culture without the language. I'm sorry. Mentioning on social media, amplifying African voices, from storytellers to artists to activists. When we look at Lupita Nyong'o, when we look at you know, some of Aduta Ketch on the runway, and even though she considers herself to be Australian, I consider herself to be South Sudanese. And when I see that glorious navy blue, like she is such an alienish, beautiful girl. Like oh my God, I show my children, I show my kids Iman, like, because my daughter is called Iman. I show her the real Iman. I'm like, see this Somalian sister here, and look at that neck, look at that, you know, she's just beautiful. When we look at, you know, Barnabo or Rema, or when we teach Chinua Achebe out here, or Ngugi wa Thiong'o, modern, and if like my kids knowing who Fela is, for example, is a huge thing. And just, you know, like on social media, amplifying these things and saying them like I'm doing right now. Discussing cultural, discussing, not just discussing, but showcasing cultural festivals, gatherings, online communities. This is a part of staying connected and taking pride on who we are. Now, representation matters. It really does matter. And like I said, when I see Lupi, I'm like, yes, a Lupi girl, show Hollywood who we are as a people. And yes, she's multi-dimensional, but she's also Kenyan. Obama, like I remember for the longest time, my husband used to tell people Obama is his cousin, and it would I would find it so funny. But that, seeing what Obama did for the black people in America and seeing what Obama did to Kenya as a place tells you how important representation is. And sometimes it's part of that's how I justify my being outside. I'm like, yes, I'm African, yes, I'm proud, but I'm out here. Why? Because it's very important for me to represent for me and my people, and to showcase how just our voices, and to tell our stories from our perspective. So when we look at ourselves and our media and our fashion and our leadership, we want to see a representation of that. I take a lot of pride in wearing African jewelry, African clothing, and also showing my girls that I do consume African. Like when we went to the Maasai village in after visiting Masai Mara, I had to sell a whole kidney for this, but I ended up buying so much jewelry from the women just because, number one, I knew I could get the same thing in Nairobi for a cheaper price, but I wanted this authenticity, and I wanted to see I wanted my children to see me enjoying supporting this small community so that they could create more beautiful things, so that they could showcase to the world what our culture is like. So watching our films or actors or our literature and things like that. And also representation matters, especially to the younger generation. There's a huge impact there. Empowering them with pride and showing them how important it is to be proud of who you are and what that can do to the world and how much good that can bring to us. And this is an effort in conserving who we are, in conserving the fragments of ourselves that we can access and we can take pride in, and the way we do our things and why that's important. It's very, very important to the younger generation. Now, the journey of decolonization of the minds, it begins with each one of us, with you, with me. We are choosing to unlearn or to acknowledge what we don't know, or our toxic notions of beauty, of standards, of technology, of knowledge, of all of these things, recognizing that this was input in us wrongfully and it's actually not a representation of the truth, and then relearning and reclaiming our Africanness by honoring our ancestors and building our future where our children can walk with pride in who they are. And just being ready to join the movement of taking pride in our food, in the way we produce things so wholesomely, in the way we engage with each other, the beauty of community and togetherness, and why our ancestors did the things they did in the way they did. And of course, we are shedding away all the rubbish and all the nonsense that came to that. We are blowing out all the chaff and remaining with the grain so that our future generations, our children, can inherit the quality content that is being processed through tumultuousness and pain and death and bloodshed, and reclaiming a much purer and much more beautiful idea of who we are, and to live that with pride. And so if you really enjoy this, one of the ways we can make sure that this message is carried out into the world is by you liking and commenting and sharing and subscribing and hitting the notification bell. I bet you didn't see that capitalist side of me coming, did ya? Anyway, hey, it's a hustle. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. I'm hoping you learned, you maybe rewired, re-understood. I'm hoping that you have things to say and things to share and how else we can do this. But that African love, that like deep love, I have that for you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful whatever time of the day it is in your part of the world. Cheers.